Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the UHS Vengeance. His hands gripped the metal railing as he stared at the screen in front of him. Another colony attacked. Another 1,000 people taken. His jaw tightened with anger. The aliens called themselves the Xanthir Collective. They had been raiding human colonies for years. They took people and sold them as slaves across the galaxy. The worst part was that nobody stopped them. The Galactic Council just watched and did nothing. Kate Sullivan worked at the communications desk. She looked up at Jake with tired eyes. She had lost her brother in the last raid. Her voice was quiet but filled with rage. She wanted revenge just like everyone else on the ship. Humans had joined the galactic community 200 years ago. When the first alien ships arrived at Earth, humans thought it would be the start of something wonderful. They were wrong. The other species looked at Earth and called it a death world. They said it was too dangerous, too harsh, too violent. Earth was dangerous. It had earthquakes and storms. It had diseases and predators. The gravity was stronger than most other planets. The weather could kill you. But humans had survived all of it. They had learned to fight back against nature itself. The aliens feared what Earth had created. They feared humans, so they made rules to keep humanity weak. Humans could not build certain weapons. They could not expand too fast. They had to follow 1,000 different laws that other species did not have to follow. And still, the raids continued. Ships would appear above human colonies in the night. They would take people from their homes. Families were torn apart. Children were stolen. The Galactic Council said they would investigate. They never did. Kate pressed a button on her console. Her voice was steady as she spoke. There was an incoming message from Earth Command. Jake nodded and told her to put it on the main screen. He knew what was coming. He had been waiting for this moment for years. The screen lit up with the face of Admiral Ryan Brooks. The old man looked like he had been carved from stone. His gray hair was cut short. His eyes burned with a fire that Jake had never seen before. This was not a regular briefing. This was something else. Brooks spoke slowly and clearly. He told them that humanity had officially left the Galactic Council. The decision had been made at the highest levels of government. Every human leader had agreed. They were done asking for help. They were done begging for justice. The raid on New Terra had been the final insult. The Xanthir had attacked a peaceful farming colony. They had killed anyone who resisted. They had taken over 3,000 people as slaves. When human ambassadors demanded action, the council had laughed. They called humans animals. They said humans should know their place. Brooks leaned closer to the camera. His voice dropped low. He said it was time to show the galaxy what real animals could do. He said humanity had been preparing for this day. They had been building ships in secret. They had been training soldiers. They had been getting ready for war. Jake felt his heart pound in his chest. Every person on the bridge sat up straighter. This was real. After 200 years of insults and attacks, humanity was finally going to fight back. They were going to show the galaxy that Deathworlders were not weak. The Admiral gave Jake his orders. The Vengeance was to travel to Rally Point Omega. Every human military ship in the galaxy would meet there. They would gather the largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. Then they would strike at the heart of Xanthir space. Brooks explained that this was not just about revenge. This was about survival. If humanity did not act now, the raids would continue forever. More colonies would be attacked. More people would be taken. The other species would never respect humans until humans made them respect them. The transmission ended. The bridge was silent for a long moment. Then Kate spoke. Her voice was cold and hard. She said it was about time. Other crew members nodded. They had all lost someone to the Xanthir. They had all been waiting for this moment. Jake turned to face his crew. These were good people. They had trained their whole lives for combat. Many of them had ancestors who had been soldiers on Earth. They came from families of warriors and survivors. They knew how to fight and they were not afraid. He gave orders to set course for Rally Point Omega. The navigation officer entered the coordinates. The ship's engines hummed to life. All around them, other human ships were doing the same thing. They were leaving their posts and heading to the meeting point. As the Vengeance jumped into faster-than-light travel, Jake thought about what was coming. The galaxy had treated humans like second-class citizens for 2 centuries. They had put restrictions on human expansion. They had ignored human suffering. They had called humans primitive and violent. Maybe they were right. Maybe humans were violent. Maybe coming from a death world had made them harder and more dangerous than other species, but that was exactly why the galaxy should have left them alone. That was why attacking human colonies had been a terrible mistake. Kate walked over to stand beside Jake. She looked out at the stars streaming past the view screen. She asked him if he thought they could win. Jake did not hesitate. He told her that humans always won when they had no other choice. That was how they had survived on Earth. That was how they would survive in space. The journey to Rally Point Omega would take 3 days. Jake spent that time preparing his crew. They ran combat drills. They checked every weapon system. They made sure the ship was ready for battle. Everyone worked with focus and determination. On the second day, messages started coming in from other ships. Captains that Jake had served with were all heading to the same place. They shared stories about the raids and the people they had lost. They talked about finally getting justice. Jake also received a message from his sister back on Earth. She worked in one of the secret shipyards where the new fleet had been built. She told him that what he was about to see would shock him. She said humanity had built something that would change everything. When the Vengeance finally arrived at Rally Point Omega, Jake understood what his sister meant. The view screen showed hundreds of ships, then thousands. They kept appearing from hyperspace, one after another. The fleet was massive beyond belief. There were destroyers and cruisers. There were carriers filled with fighters. There were support ships and supply vessels. And then there were the dreadnoughts. 20 massive warships, each one larger than anything the Galactic Council had ever built. They were weapons of total destruction. Kate gasped when she saw them. Even the most experienced officers on the bridge stared in amazement. This was the secret humanity had been keeping. This was the answer to 200 years of oppression. This was the fury of a death world species that had finally had enough. Admiral Brooks appeared on screen again. He addressed the entire fleet. He told them they were making history. He said that future generations would remember this day as the moment humanity stood up and refused to be victims anymore. He said they were going to war, and they were going to win. The fleet began to organize into battle formations. Jake watched as military precision turned chaos into order. Every ship knew its place. Every captain knew their role. They had practiced this for years in secret simulations. As Jake looked at the massive fleet around him, he felt something he had not felt in years. Hope. Real hope that things would change. The Xanthir were about to learn a hard lesson. The galaxy was about to see what happened when you pushed humans too far. The Deathworlders were going to war, and nothing would ever be the same again. Lisa Carter stood in the command center of the UHS Defiance. She was watching the tactical display as more ships arrived. The numbers kept climbing. 3,000 ships, then 3,200. Every single one was ready for combat. Lisa had been in the military for 20 years. She had seen a lot of battles, but she had never seen anything like this. The fleet was enormous. It represented decades of secret work. Humanity had been preparing for this war while pretending to follow the Council's rules. Tyler Grant sat at his station nearby. He was monitoring the heavy assault group. 20 dreadnoughts had just finished their system checks. All of them reported ready for combat. These ships were the pride of human engineering. Each one carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. The dreadnoughts had been built in secret shipyards beyond the edge of the Sol system. They were hidden in the darkness between stars where Council patrols never went. Engineers had worked in complete secrecy for 50 years. The result was a weapon that would shock the entire galaxy. Admiral Brooks entered the command center. 2 other high-ranking officers came with him. General Amanda Price was in charge of all ground forces. Colonel Eric Stone commanded the special operations teams. Together, they represented the best military minds humanity had. Brooks asked for a status report. Lisa stepped forward and gave him the numbers. Over 3,000 combat vessels were ready. Ground forces were loaded onto assault ships. Marines were at their stations. Every unit had been briefed on the battle plan. She pulled up intelligence data on the display. Human spies had been working inside Xanthir space for years. They had mapped every military base. They knew where the defense platforms were. They had the locations of all the major slaver compounds where human prisoners were kept. General Price spoke next. She explained that the Xanthir would not be expecting this attack. For 200 years, the Xanthir had seen humans as weak. They thought humans were too divided to fight back. They had no idea what was coming. Price said that Deathworld species were different from other aliens. Humans had evolved on a planet that tried to kill them every day. They learned to adapt faster. They learned to work together under pressure. They learned to never give up no matter how bad things got. Colonel Stone activated the battle plan on the main display. Red markers showed Xanthir defensive positions. Blue arrows showed where human forces would attack. It was a direct assault on the Xanthir home system. Any other species would call it suicide, but humans did not think like other species. They had learned warfare from thousands of years of fighting on Earth. They had studied every conflict in their history. They knew that sometimes the direct approach was the best approach. Sometimes you had to hit the enemy so hard they could not recover. Brooks looked at the officers around him. He knew many of them personally. Some had served with him for decades. They had all lost friends and family to Xanthir raids. This war was personal for everyone in the fleet. The admiral began to speak to the entire fleet through the communication system. His voice was broadcast to every ship. He told them that today they would take back their future. Today they would show the galaxy what happened when you attacked humanity. He reminded them that they were fighting for their families. They were fighting for the thousands of humans held in slavery. They were fighting for colonies that lived in fear of the next raid. This was not a war of conquest. This was a war of liberation. Brooks also gave them a warning. The battle ahead would be hard. Some ships would not come home. Some soldiers would die. But their sacrifice would mean that future generations of humans could live in peace. Their sacrifice would mean that humanity would finally be respected. Lisa felt the deck vibrate beneath her feet. The Defiance's jump drives were powering up. All around the fleet, 3,000 other ships were doing the same thing. The jump would take them directly into Xanthir space. When they arrived, the war would begin. She thought about her own family back on Earth. Her parents had survived a Xanthir raid when she was young. They had hidden while aliens took their neighbors. The memory of that night had driven Lisa to join the military. Now she would finally get justice. Tyler checked his readings one more time. All ships were reporting ready. The fleet was in perfect formation. Fighters were ready to launch. Marines were in their drop ships. Weapon systems were armed and targeting computers were active. Brooks gave the order. All ships would jump on his mark. Lisa grabbed onto her station as the countdown began. 10 seconds, 9 seconds, 8 seconds. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a knife. Everyone knew their lives were about to change forever. 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds. Lisa said a quick prayer, not for victory but for the strength to do what needed to be done. She thought about all the humans suffering in Xanthir slave camps. Soon they would be free. 2 seconds. 1 second mark. The entire fleet jumped at once. 3,000 ships vanished from Rally Point Omega in a flash of light. For a moment, there was nothing but the strange sensation of faster-than-light travel. Then reality snapped back into place. They had arrived at the edge of the Xanthir home system. The view screens showed a planet ahead. It was a beautiful world with blue oceans and green continents. It looked peaceful. But Lisa knew better. That planet was built on the suffering of countless slaves. Alarms began screaming on every Xanthir installation. Their sensors had detected the human fleet. They were scrambling to respond. But it was already too late. The humans had arrived in perfect attack formation. They were ready to strike. Brooks stood tall on the bridge of the Defiance. He looked at the planet ahead with cold eyes. He thought about every human who had been taken from their home. He thought about every family that had been torn apart. He thought about 200 years of suffering. Then he gave the order that would change galactic history forever. All ships were to engage. All weapons were to fire. The war had begun. The human fleet surged forward like a wave of metal and fury. Thousands of ships moved as one. They had practiced this maneuver 1,000 times. Every captain knew exactly what to do. Every gunner had their targets locked. The Xanthir defense fleet tried to form up. They had about 500 ships in the system. Under normal circumstances, that would be enough to defend against any attack. But these were not normal circumstances. They were facing the full might of humanity. Lisa watched as the first shots were fired. Human railguns sent metal slugs flying at incredible speeds. The projectiles tore through Xanthir's shields like paper. Ships that had seemed invincible began to explode. The dreadnoughts opened fire with their main cannons. Each shot was like a small star being born. The energy weapons were so powerful that they could be seen across the entire system. When they hit their targets, entire Xanthir cruisers simply ceased to exist. General Price watched from her command ship. She was waiting for the space battle to create an opening. Once the orbital defenses were down, she would send in the Marines. They would land on the planet and free every human prisoner they could find. Colonel Stone was already in his dropship with his special operations team. Their mission was different. They would target the Xanthir leadership. They would capture the people who had ordered the raids on human colonies. Those aliens would face justice. Tyler reported that the outer defense platforms had been destroyed. The path to the planet was clear. Brooks nodded and ordered the next wave to advance. Hundreds of human ships pushed deeper into the system. Lisa allowed herself a small smile. The battle was going exactly as planned. The Xanthir had been caught completely off guard. They had thought humans were weak. They had thought humans would never dare to attack. They were learning how wrong they had been. The Deathworlders had come to war, and the galaxy would never forget it. Nicole Webb commanded a destroyer squadron at the front of the human fleet. Her 12 ships moved fast and hit hard. They were the tip of the spear. Their job was to clear the way for the heavier vessels behind them. The Xanthir had built defense platforms around their home world. These were large stations with powerful weapons. They were supposed to make the planet impossible to attack. But they had one weakness. They were designed to fight ships that attacked slowly and carefully. Human ships did not attack slowly. Nicole ordered her squadron to maximum speed. They rushed straight at the nearest platform. Xanthir gunners tried to target them, but the human ships were too fast. Before the aliens could react, railgun fire tore the platform apart. Explosions lit up the darkness of space. Debris scattered in all directions. Nicole did not slow down. She immediately targeted the next platform. Her crew worked with perfect efficiency. They had trained for this exact scenario hundreds of times. Within minutes, all the outer platforms were destroyed. Nicole reported back to the fleet. The path was clear. The heavy units could advance. She felt satisfaction as she watched the dreadnoughts move forward. Those massive ships would finish what her destroyers had started. The dreadnought UHS Liberty led the advance. Its captain ordered all weapons to fire at once. The ship's main cannons unleashed devastating energy beams. Each shot was powerful enough to crack a small moon. Against the Xanthir defense fleet, they were like hammers striking glass. Xanthir cruisers exploded one after another. Their shields could not hold against human weapons. Their armor melted under the heat. Ships that had been feared across the galaxy died in seconds. The Xanthir commanders began to panic. Daniel Cross was a fighter pilot. He sat in the cockpit of his small attack craft, waiting for the order to launch. When it came, he and 200 other pilots shot out of their carrier bays. The space around them was filled with explosions and weapons fire. The Xanthir launched their own fighters to defend the planet. Their ships were fast and well-armed. They had won many battles against other species, but they had never fought humans before. They were about to learn a hard lesson. Human pilots were different from others in the galaxy. They had grown up on a planet with heavy gravity. Their bodies and reflexes had evolved to handle Earth's harsh conditions. This gave them an advantage in combat. They could handle higher speeds and tighter turns than most aliens. Daniel saw a Xanthir fighter coming straight at him. The alien pilot was good, but Daniel was better. He pulled his ship into a spin that would have knocked out most other species. Then he fired. His missiles found their target and the enemy fighter exploded. All around him, other human pilots were doing the same thing. The space battle became a slaughter. Xanthir fighters fell by the dozens. Their pilots could not match human speed and aggression. Within an hour, the Xanthir fighter wings were completely destroyed. On the Defiance, Lisa monitored the entire battle. Reports came in from every sector. All of them were good news. The Xanthir defense fleet was falling apart. Their command structure was breaking down. Some ships were trying to run away. Admiral Brooks gave new orders. No Xanthir ship would be allowed to escape. The entire system was locked down. Any ship that tried to leave would be destroyed. He wanted to make sure that news of this defeat spread in exactly the way he wanted. Lisa saw the tactical display shift as human ships moved to block all the jump points. The Xanthir were trapped. They had nowhere to run. The only choice they had was to surrender or die fighting. Most of them chose to surrender. General Price stood in her command ship and watched the space battle reach its conclusion. Now it was her turn. She gave the order for all Marine units to prepare for planetary assault. Thousands of soldiers checked their weapons and armor. Megan Hill was a Marine captain. She had waited years for this moment. Her family had been taken in a raid when she was a teenager. She had joined the military to fight back. Now she would finally free the prisoners. The dropships launched from their carriers. Hundreds of them descended toward the planet below. Xanthir ground forces tried to shoot them down. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. But the human ships had heavy armor and strong shields. Most of them made it through. Megan's dropship hit the ground hard. The ramp dropped and she ran out with her squad right behind her. They were in a large compound where humans were being held. Xanthir guards opened fire immediately. Human armor was better than Xanthir weapons. The enemy shots bounced off or were absorbed by shields. The Marines returned fire with their assault rifles. Within minutes, the guards were dead or had surrendered. Megan kicked open the door to the prison cells. Inside, she found hundreds of humans. They were thin and dirty. Many of them had been prisoners for years. Some had been born in captivity. When they saw Megan's armor with the Earth flag on it, many of them started crying. She told them they were free. She told them that humanity had come for them. The prisoners could hardly believe it. They had given up hope of ever being rescued. Now Marines were leading them to transport ships that would take them home. All across the planet, the same scene was playing out. Marine units hit every slave compound. They freed thousands of humans in the first hour. The Xanthir military tried to stop them, but it was useless. Human soldiers were better trained, better equipped, and far more motivated. Colonel Stone and his special operations team had a different mission. They landed near the capital city where the Xanthir leadership was located. Their goal was to capture the top officials who had ordered the raids. The team moved through the city like ghosts. They avoided large battles and focused on their objective. When they reached the government building, they found the Xanthir leaders trying to escape through secret tunnels. Stone blocked their path. The Xanthir officials looked shocked. They demanded to know who he was. Stone told them he was from Earth. He told them they were under arrest for crimes against humanity. Then his team put them in restraints. Back in space, Admiral Brooks received reports that the ground operations were successful. Every major slave compound had been liberated. The Xanthir leadership was in custody. The entire Xanthir home system was now under human control. Brooks allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The first major battle was won, but he knew this was just the beginning. News of this attack would spread across the galaxy. Other species would have to decide how to respond. Lisa came to stand beside him. She looked tired but happy. She asked what would happen next. Brooks told her that they would wait and see. The Galactic Council would have to respond. The question was whether they would offer peace or choose war. Either way, humanity was ready. The Deathworlders had shown their strength. The galaxy would never underestimate them again. On the planet below, freed humans were being loaded onto transport ships. Many of them had not seen the sky in years. As they looked up at the human fleet above, they knew that everything had changed. They were going home. The news of the Xanthir defeat reached the Galactic Council within hours. Every species in the galaxy heard about it. The impossible had happened. A primitive species from a death world had crushed one of the most powerful military forces in known space. Kevin Ward was the human ambassador to the Galactic Council. He had held this position for 5 years. During that time, he had watched the Council ignore every human complaint. He had listened to them make excuses for the Xanthir raids. He had seen them treat humanity with contempt. Now he stood in the center of the Council chambers. Above him, hundreds of alien representatives looked down from their seats. The room was designed to make whoever stood in the center feel small and weak. But Kevin did not feel weak. Not anymore. The Pleiadian delegates spoke first. Their species were known for being peaceful. They rarely raised their voices. But today they were almost screaming. They accused humanity of breaking every treaty and law. They said humans were dangerous criminals who needed to be stopped. Kevin listened quietly. He let them rant. He let them express their anger and fear. When they finally stopped talking, the chamber went silent. Everyone waited to hear what the human would say. Kevin spoke in a calm voice. He reminded the council of every time humans had asked for help. He reminded them of every raid that went unpunished. He told them about colonies that lived in terror. He spoke about families torn apart and people sold into slavery. He said that humans had followed the rules for 200 years. They had obeyed the treaties even when those treaties were unfair. They had accepted restrictions that no other species had to follow. They had been patient when they should have been angry. And what had that patience earned them? Nothing. The raids continued. The Council did nothing. Other species called humans animals and savages. They treated Earth like it was a prison that needed to be kept locked. A delegate from the Vexian Empire interrupted. The Vexians were a militaristic species. They prided themselves on their combat abilities. The delegate said that humans were too violent and unstable to be trusted. He said they came from a death world and it showed in everything they did. Kevin smiled at that. It was not a friendly smile. He agreed completely. Yes, humans came from a death world. Earth was a planet that tried to kill its inhabitants every single day. Storms, earthquakes, diseases, predators. Everything on Earth was dangerous. But that was exactly what made humans strong. They had learned to survive in impossible conditions. They had learned to adapt to any challenge. They had learned to never give up no matter how bad things got. These were the traits of a death world species. Kevin activated a display showing images from the battle at Xanthir. Ships exploding, defenses crumbling. The entire Xanthir military crushed in a matter of hours. He told the Council that this was what happened when you pushed Deathworlders too far. He explained that humans had not wanted this war. They had tried every peaceful option first, but the Council had left them no choice. When your people are being enslaved and nobody will help you, eventually you have to help yourself. The Council chamber erupted in chaos. Different species started arguing with each other. Some wanted to declare war on humanity immediately. Others urged caution. A few suggested that maybe the humans had a point. The Council leader was an ancient being from the Draconic's hegemony. Her species had been part of the galactic community for thousands of years. She had seen many conflicts. She raised her clawed hand and the chamber fell silent. She asked Kevin a direct question. What did humanity want? What would it take for this war to end? The old alien's eyes were sharp and intelligent. She understood that humanity now held all the power in this negotiation. Kevin laid out humanity's demands. First, every human being held as a slave anywhere in the galaxy must be returned immediately, no exceptions. Second, the species that had taken them must pay reparations for the suffering they caused. Third, the Xanthir Collective would be dismantled. Their government would be dissolved. Their military would be destroyed. The Xanthir people would be allowed to survive, but they would never again be a threat to anyone. Fourth, and most important, humanity would have a permanent seat on the Galactic Council. They would have full voting rights. They would have veto power over council decisions. Never again would humans be treated as second-class citizens. The Pleiadian delegate said these demands were impossible. The council would never agree. Kevin asked them a simple question. Did they want peace or war? Because humanity was ready for either option. He explained that the human fleet at Xanthir was just the beginning. Humanity had prepared target packages for every major military installation in council space. They could hit 100 different worlds at the same time. They had been planning this for 50 years. Kevin made it very clear. Humanity would never go back to being victims. They would never again accept being treated like primitives. Those days were over. The council could accept this new reality peacefully or they could learn the hard way. The chamber went completely silent. Every delegate understood the threat. Humanity had proven they could back up their words with overwhelming force. The question now was whether the council would be wise enough to accept peace. Several smaller species began whispering among themselves. They had always been afraid of the larger militaristic species. Now they saw an opportunity. If humanity joined the council with real power, it might create a balance. The smaller species might finally have protection. The Vexian delegate stood up angrily. He said his empire would never accept these terms. He said the Vexians would form their own coalition to fight humanity. Several other militaristic species voiced their agreement. Kevin turned to face the Vexian directly. He asked if the Vexian Empire really wanted to test themselves against a Deathworld species. He reminded them that the Xanthir had been confident too. Now the Xanthir homeworld was occupied by human forces. He pulled up more images from the battle. He showed them the human dreadnoughts that could crack moons. He showed them the marine forces that had overwhelmed Xanthir ground troops. He showed them fighter pilots who moved with reflexes no other species could match. Then Kevin delivered his final message. Admiral Brooks had authorized him to share classified information. He showed them intelligence reports on human military capabilities. The fleet at Xanthir was only 30% of humanity's total forces. The Council was shocked. If what they had seen was only part of human strength, then a full-scale war would be devastating. Even if they all united against humanity, the casualties would be enormous, and there was no guarantee they would win. The Council leader looked tired. She had lived for centuries. She had seen too much death and destruction. She did not want to see more. She told Kevin that the Council would need time to deliberate on the human demands. Kevin nodded. He understood that the Council needed to save face. They could not appear to give in too easily. But he also gave them a deadline. They had 1 week to make a decision. After that, the human fleet would begin moving toward new targets. As Kevin left the chamber, he felt the weight of what had just happened. Humanity had gambled everything on this moment. They had bet that showing their strength would earn respect rather than unite the galaxy against them. Now they would wait and see if that gamble would pay off. The next week would decide the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. The week of waiting was the hardest time Jake Morrison had ever experienced. His fleet remained at the Xanthir homeworld, ready to move at a moment's notice. Every day felt like a year. Every hour brought new tension. The crew of the Vengeance stayed at battle stations. They ran drills and checked weapons. They maintained their ships and prepared for whatever came next. Some of them thought the Council would choose peace. Others were certain war would continue. Kate Sullivan spent her time coordinating communications between all the human ships. Messages came in constantly from Earth. The entire planet was watching and waiting. Schools taught children about what was happening. News broadcasts covered every development. On the fourth day, something unexpected happened. 3 species that had stayed quiet during the Council meeting sent private messages to humanity. They were smaller species that had been pushed around by the larger empires for centuries. These species said they supported human demands. They said it was time for the galaxy to change. They were tired of being weak and afraid. If humanity could stand up to the Council, maybe others could too. Admiral Brooks read these messages with interest. He had not expected this. The war had started as a fight for human freedom, but it was becoming something larger. Other species were seeing humanity as a symbol of resistance against oppression. On the 6th day, the Vexian Empire made its move. They announced they were forming a military coalition against humanity. 5 other warrior species joined them. Together, they began assembling their own fleet. Brooks immediately ordered human forces to prepare for a larger war. If the Vexian coalition attacked, humanity would need every ship it had. He sent messages to secret bases across human space. More ships began moving toward defensive positions. Lisa Carter worked around the clock to coordinate the military response. She plotted defensive strategies and identified potential targets. If war expanded, humanity would strike hard and fast. They would not give their enemies time to organize. But then something happened that nobody expected. The Draconics hegemony, the most ancient and respected species in the Council, made an announcement. They said they were breaking from the Vexian coalition. They said they would support a diplomatic solution. The Council leader explained her reasoning in a public broadcast. She said that humanity had legitimate grievances. The raids on their colonies had been wrong. The Council's failure to act had been wrong. It was time to correct these mistakes. She also pointed out something practical. A war against humanity would be devastating for everyone. Even if they won, the casualties would be massive. It was better to accept peace and adapt to a new balance of power. Her announcement changed everything. The Draconics were respected across the galaxy. When they chose peace, dozens of other species followed. The Vexian coalition began to fall apart as members withdrew. On the 7th day, exactly 1 week after Kevin Ward had delivered humanity's demands, the Galactic Council sent their response. They accepted all human terms. Every slave would be freed. Reparations would be paid. The Xanthir Collective would be dissolved. Humanity would join the Council with full power. When the news reached the fleet, celebrations erupted on every ship. Crews cheered and hugged each other. Some cried with relief. They had won without having to fight another massive battle. Their gamble had paid off. Jake stood on the bridge of the Vengeance and allowed himself to smile. Kate came to stand beside him. She looked happier than he had seen her in years. Her brother had died in a raid, but now no other families would suffer the same fate. Admiral Brooks addressed the entire fleet one final time. He told them they had made history. They had stood up for their species and won. Future generations would remember them as the people who earned humanity's freedom, but he also reminded them that victory brought responsibility. Humanity now had real power in the galaxy. They had to use that power wisely. They could not become the oppressors they had fought against. The process of freeing human slaves began immediately. Ships were sent to dozens of worlds. Marines landed and liberated prisoners. Many of these people had been held for years. Some had never seen Earth. They cried when they learned they were finally free. Megan Hill personally led missions to free prisoners on 3 different planets. Each time she saw the same reaction. Disbelief, then joy, then tears. She made sure every freed human knew that their own people had come for them. Nobody had been forgotten. The Xanthir leadership was put on trial for their crimes. The proceedings were broadcast across the galaxy. It was important that everyone see justice being done. The Xanthir officials were found guilty and sentenced to long prison terms. The Xanthir people themselves were not punished. Human leaders made it clear that they blamed the government, not the citizens. The Xanthir population would be allowed to rebuild their society, but they would do it without a military and under council supervision. Kevin Ward became humanity's first representative with full council powers. He worked with the smaller species to form new alliances. For the first time in galactic history, the weaker species had real protection against aggression. The Vexian Empire and their few remaining allies stayed angry. But they did not dare to attack. They had seen what human forces could do. They knew that any war would cost them dearly. So they stayed quiet and watched. Months passed. The galaxy adjusted to its new reality. Human ships patrolled trade routes and kept them safe. Human marines helped defend colonies that asked for assistance. Human engineers shared technology with species that wanted to learn. General Price established training programs where human soldiers taught combat tactics to other species. Many aliens were surprised to learn that humans were willing to share their knowledge. They had expected humans to hoard their military advantages, but that was not the human way. Humans believed in cooperation and mutual defense. They had learned on Earth that working together made everyone stronger. Now they applied those same principles to galactic relations. Trade between Earth and other worlds increased dramatically. Human goods became popular across the galaxy. Art, music, food, and technology from a death world fascinated aliens. They wanted to understand the species that had changed everything. Cultural exchange programs were established. Young humans traveled to alien worlds to learn. Young aliens came to Earth and were amazed by what they saw. Many of them could not believe anyone could survive on such a dangerous planet. Jake Morrison eventually retired from active duty. He had spent most of his adult life in the military. Now he wanted to do something different. He became a teacher, educating the next generation about the war and why it had been necessary. He told his students that strength alone was not enough. Humanity had won because they were strong, yes, but they had also won because they were right. They had fought for justice, not conquest. That was the difference between warriors and tyrants. Kate Sullivan stayed in the military and rose through the ranks. She eventually became an admiral herself. She made sure that human forces never forgot why they existed. They were protectors, not oppressors. Their job was to defend, not to dominate. Lisa Carter continued serving as well. She specialized in defensive strategies and helped design new ships. Her work ensured that humanity would always be ready if another threat emerged. But she also worked on peaceful projects, building trade vessels and exploration ships. Years passed and the galaxy continued to change. The war became history. Children who had been born after the conflict grew up in a different universe, one where humanity was respected, one where raids on human colonies were unthinkable. The Deathworlders had shown the galaxy something important. They had proven that coming from a harsh world did not make you savage. It made you strong. It made you adaptable. It made you able to survive and thrive in any environment. And they had proven that patience had limits. Push any species far enough and they would push back. The galaxy had learned to respect humanity. Not just because humans were dangerous, but because they had earned their place among the stars. 10 years had passed since the war ended. The galaxy had settled into a new normal. Humanity was now a major power with influence across hundreds of worlds. The Galactic Council had become a more fair and balanced institution. Admiral Ryan Brooks was now very old. He had retired from active command 5 years ago. But people still came to him for advice. Young officers wanted to learn from the man who had led humanity to victory. Diplomats asked his opinion on important decisions. He spent most of his time on Earth now. He had a small house near the ocean. Sometimes he would sit on his porch and watch the waves. He thought about all the battles he had fought. He thought about the people who had died under his command. One day, a transport ship landed near his house. Out stepped a young woman with 2 children. Brooks recognized her immediately. It was one of the prisoners who had been freed from the Xanthir slave camps. She had been just a teenager back then. She told Brooks that she wanted him to meet her family. She had gotten married and had 2 kids. She had built a good life. None of it would have been possible without the war. She wanted to say thank you. Brooks felt tears in his eyes. This was why they had fought. Not for glory or power. For families. For freedom. For the chance to live without fear. He spent the afternoon with the woman and her children, listening to their stories. Similar scenes were happening all across human space. The people who had been freed were now living full lives. They had jobs and families. They were contributing to society. Some of them had become teachers, sharing their stories with young people. The war had changed humanity in other ways too. Humans were now more confident in their place in the galaxy. They no longer felt like outsiders. They had proven they belonged among the stars. Young people dreamed of exploring new worlds and making contact with new species. Human culture spread across the galaxy. Alien species listened to Earth music and watched Earth movies. They read human books and tried human food. Many of them were fascinated by the concept of a death world. They wanted to understand what made humans different. Some brave aliens even visited Earth. They came with special equipment to help them handle the gravity and environment. They were amazed and terrified by everything they saw. Storms that could destroy cities, oceans that could swallow ships, animals that could kill with ease, but they also saw beauty, mountains that touched the sky, forests filled with life, cities where millions of humans lived and worked together. They began to understand that Earth had not just made humans tough. It had made them appreciate life. Colonel Eric Stone had left the military after the war. He now worked as a security consultant, helping other species protect themselves. He traveled across the galaxy teaching defensive tactics. He was respected everywhere he went. One day he was hired by a Xanthir colony. The Xanthir people had been rebuilding their society. Most of them were ashamed of what their old government had done. They wanted to prove they had changed. Hiring a human security expert was part of that. Stone was hesitant at first. These were the people whose leaders had enslaved humans. But when he arrived, he found ordinary citizens trying to make honest lives. They apologized for the past. They asked him to help protect their children. He agreed to help them. This was what peace meant. Moving forward. Not forgetting the past, but not letting it poison the future. Stone spent months on the Xanthir colony. He trained their security forces and helped them set up defenses. When he left, the Xanthir colonists thanked him. They said he had shown them that humans were not monsters seeking revenge. Humans were people who believed in justice, but also in redemption. Stone hoped they were right. Ambassador Kevin Ward had become one of the most influential figures in galactic politics. He used his position on the council to advocate for smaller species. He pushed for laws that protected the weak from the strong. He worked to make the galaxy more fair. Some of the larger empires resented him for this, but they could not ignore him. Humanity had become too powerful, and humans had allies now. The smaller species that had once been afraid now stood together with Earth. Ward knew that maintaining peace required constant work. There were still species that resented humanity's rise. There were still conflicts and disputes. But now these problems were solved through negotiation instead of raids and slavery. The human military remained strong. New ships were built every year. Training programs continued. Humanity had learned an important lesson. Peace was only possible when you were strong enough to defend it. Weakness invited aggression, but humans also invested heavily in science and exploration. New colonies were founded on distant worlds. Research stations studied everything from alien biology to advanced physics. Humans were curious about the universe and eager to learn. One of these research stations made an incredible discovery. They found evidence of an ancient civilization that had existed millions of years ago. This civilization had been more advanced than any current species. Then they had vanished without explanation. The discovery fascinated the entire galaxy. Humans worked with alien scientists to study the ruins. They found technology that nobody understood. They found art that showed a sophisticated culture. They found mysteries that might take centuries to solve. This became a new goal for the galactic community. Instead of fighting each other, they could work together to understand the past. Instead of competing, they could cooperate. Humanity's war had shown everyone that conflict was expensive and destructive. Nicole Webb, the destroyer captain who had fought in the first battle, was now teaching at the military academy on Earth. She told her students about the war, but she also told them about what came after. She said that winning the war was important, but building the peace was even harder. Her students were a new generation. Many of them had been children during the war. They had grown up in a galaxy where humans were respected. They took that respect for granted. Webb made sure they understood that respect had been earned through sacrifice. She also taught them that being strong meant knowing when not to use your strength. Humanity could have conquered many worlds after the war. They had the military power, but they chose partnership instead. That choice had made them truly great. Daniel Cross, the fighter pilot, had a different path. He fell in love with flying so much that he became a civilian pilot. He flew transport ships between worlds. He loved seeing different planets and meeting different species. Sometimes passengers would recognize him from the war. They would ask him to tell stories about the battles. He always said the same thing. The fighting was necessary, but it was not glorious. War was terrible. The real heroes were the people who worked to prevent the next war. On Earth, monuments had been built to remember the war. The names of every human who died were carved in stone. People visited these monuments to pay respects. They brought flowers and left messages. The sacrifice would never be forgotten, but there were also monuments to peace. Gardens where human and alien children played together. Libraries where knowledge from hundreds of worlds was shared freely. These monuments looked forward instead of back. They celebrated what had been built. Admiral Brooks died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 97. His funeral was attended by representatives from dozens of species. Even some Xanthir came to pay their respects. They said he had been a worthy opponent and a fair victor. At his funeral, one of the speakers was a young person who had been born after the war. She said that Brooks and his generation had given them a gift. They had given them a galaxy where humans could live without fear, where they could reach their full potential, where they belonged. The human fleet performed a final salute. Ships from across human space gathered in formation above Earth. They fired their weapons into empty space, creating brilliant lights in the sky. It was a goodbye to their old commander and a promise to uphold what he had built. Humanity continued to grow and prosper. New colonies were founded. New technologies were developed. New friendships with alien species were formed. The Deathworlders had not just survived. They had thrived. The story of the war became legend. Parents told their children about the day humanity stood up and declared they would not be victims anymore. Teachers explained how diplomacy and strength had worked together to create lasting peace. And across the galaxy, on thousands of worlds, the lesson was remembered. Never push a Deathworld species too far. Never mistake patience for weakness. Never underestimate those who have learned to survive in the harshest conditions. The Galactic Council had chambers where representatives from all species met. In the human section, there was a plaque on the wall. It had a simple message that summarized everything that had happened. The plaque read, "We asked for justice and were ignored. We begged for peace and were mocked. We demanded respect and were called savages. So we showed them what savages from a death world could really do. We won our freedom. We earned our place. We built a better future." Below that was a list of names. Every human who had died in the war. Thousands of names. Each one representing a person who had given everything so that others could live in peace. They would never be forgotten. Humanity had come a long way from that day when Admiral Brooks gave the order to go to war. They had fought. They had won. They had built something lasting. The Deathworlders had proven they deserved